I was born in a village so small, even the war forgot its name at least for a little while. Dongha. A name you wouldn't find on a map, a place nestled between the arms of rice fields and the hush of the mountains. We were the kind of people who measured time by the monsoon, who believed in both ancestors and old ghosts. A place where the sun cracked the ground in summer, and the rain turned paths to swamps so deep you could lose your sandal and your patience in the same step. Ours was not a life of choices. We were farmers. We harvested what we could and gave half of it away. We mended our clothes with patches made from old rice sacks. Our roofs leaked, our shoes were made of rubber tires, and our hands looked like the soil we tilled, dark, cracked, and proud. My earliest memory is of my mother's hand scrubbing blood off the kitchen floor after a chicken slaughter. She wasn't crying, just focused lips pressed thin, hair tied back in a hand-woven scarf. That's how she was always doing, never speaking more than necessary. My father had died by then, swept away by the sea on a fishing trip during the rainy season. I was 4. I never knew him beyond a fading photograph, where he stood in a too large shirt, holding me as a baby, I staring at the camera like he already knew he wouldn't be around to see me grow. My mother didn't remarry. That kind of strength, I didn't understand it then. She spent her life in the rice fields, her back bent as if bowing to the earth in constant apology. Every morning before the roosters stirred, she was already out walking barefoot into the morning mist, balancing bamboo baskets over her shoulder, planting herself in the muck like a tree with roots that would not be moved, no matter the season. We shared a small bamboo house, walls woven with palm, patched in cloth and prayer. At night, the stars peeked through the roof. We'd listen to frogs croak like a chorus of old men and the sound of rain on leaves like lullabies of the forgotten. There was no electricity, no books beyond what the traveling teacher brought once a month. But I loved learning. I loved words. I saved every piece of paper I could find and taught myself to write my name again and again, as if spelling it might somehow make me more real. The war didn't come to us suddenly. It crept in, quiet as a rumor. First came the talk. Adults whispering late into the night, huddled over bowls of rice. The Americans were helping. The Americans were invading. The North was marching south. The South was crumbling. The truth got lost somewhere between the rumors and the fear. One day, a body washed up near the river. A young man, shot in the chest, his face half-eaten by the fish. No one knew his name, or maybe no one dared to speak it. That was the first time I saw death not as a story but as something real, something with a smell, a color, a weight. Then came the sounds, distant booms that shook the night like bad dreams. Our village became a place of caution. We no longer lit fires after dark. We no longer trusted strangers. My uncle, who once sang at weddings, stopped singing altogether. People disappeared. Soldiers passed through like storms, asking questions with guns instead of words. At 16, I began working in the fields full-time. My hands blistered, my shoulders hardened. My mother would sometimes stop, look at me and sigh. Not sadness. Something deeper. Like she knew the war would take me one way or another. It did. I was 17 when they called my name. A man in uniform came with papers. There were no questions, no debates. Just a nod, a stamp, and a date. I was to report to the military post by the end of the month. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just looked at the earth beneath my feet and felt it slip away. That night, my mother sat me down. She placed a small jade bracelet in my hand, one that had belonged to her mother, and her mother before that. She wrapped my fingers around it and said, "You are not going to war to kill. You are going to survive. Remember who you are. And no matter how dark it gets, do not forget your name." It was the longest thing she had said to me in years. I couldn't sleep that night. The frogs croaked louder. The wind hissed through the cracks in the walls. I imagined what it would feel like to kill a man. I imagined what it would feel like to die. The morning I left, the entire village gathered at the edge of the field. 4 of us were chosen: me, Thin, Bao, and Loc. We were neighbors, schoolmates, rice harvesters. Now we were soldiers. My mother stood behind the others, arms crossed, eyes dry. She didn't hug me. That wasn't her way. But when the truck came, and I climbed aboard, I turned to look back one last time. And for just a moment, I saw her lips trembling. That was enough to break me, though I didn't cry until the truck had turned the corner and left my childhood behind. Training camp was a different world. Mud, sweat, barking orders. They shaved our heads, stripped us of our names, and gave us numbers. I was Soldier 23401. My boots didn't fit. My uniform was too short in the legs and too long in the sleeves. Everything smelled like fear. We woke before dawn and ran until our legs screamed. We crawled through trenches, learned to shoot rifles so old they jammed half the time. We were told to aim not at men, but at silhouettes. "Do not think," our sergeant barked. "Thinking is dangerous. Feeling is fatal. You want to live? Be a machine." There was a boy from Hugh who cried every night into his blanket. Another boy snapped and tried to run away on the second week. They brought him back in pieces. Food was rice and salt. Sometimes a bit of pork if we were lucky. Letters were censored, if they came at all. I wrote to my mother once a month. I never knew if she got them. My first deployment was in the jungle north of Quang Tri. It was a place that reeked of rot and rain, where the trees grew so thick, they blocked out the sun. We lived in holes. Ate whatever we could kill or catch. The mosquitoes were relentless. The leeches worse. I watched a man die from a fever in less than a day. No bullets, no enemies, just nature, cruel and patient. The first firefight changed everything. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. We walked in single file, the jungle humming around us. Then crack. A gunshot. Then another. Then all hell broke loose. I saw Bao fall. Shot in the throat. Blood sprayed like water from a broken pipe. I froze. My body refused to move. Until Thin screamed my name and pulled me behind a tree. I fired my first shot that day. I don't know if I hit anyone. I don't remember much except the sound like thunder and metal crashing together in a song no one wanted to hear. When it ended, 2 of ours were dead. 5 wounded. Bao was buried in a shallow grave with no marker. That night, I couldn't stop shaking. I held the jade bracelet in my hand and whispered to it like it could protect me. I slept with my rifle across my chest and dreams filled with screams. Weeks passed. Months blurred. I became someone else. My hands knew how to kill. My eyes learned not to blink at bodies. I stopped writing home. What was there to say? That I was still breathing? That I no longer knew who I was? One day, during a mission to escort supplies to a remote outpost, we were ambushed. I never saw it coming. One moment we were walking through a ravine. The next, an explosion tore through the air. My ears rang. My legs gave out. Pain exploded in my side. I remember falling, hitting the ground, smelling fire, and then nothing. I woke in a haze of white and metal. The light was too bright, the air too cold. I thought I was dead. But death doesn't smell like antiseptic and rust. Voices buzzed around Minh in Vietnamese, others in English. Then, one hand touched mine. Cool. Gentle. Human. And a voice. A woman's voice. Soft. Not shouting. Not commanding. Just saying my name. Not my number. My name. Minh. That was the first time I heard her voice. I didn't know who she was. I didn't know where I was. But in that moment, I wept for the first time since I left home. Her name was Claire. But I would learn that later. For now, she was just a presence in the foga light in the dark. And the war. The war was far from over. I woke to a pain so sharp, it felt like a knife had taken residence in my ribs. At first, I thought I was dreaming because the ceiling above me was white, not bamboo, because the sheets beneath me were clean, not woven straw, because the air smelled like chemicals, not mud. For a moment, I believed I had died. Then I moved and death would never hurt this much. I groaned without meaning to, and the sound of my own voice startled me. It was weak, cracked, like something scraped from the bottom of a dry well. My body was wrapped tightly, bandages across my abdomen, gauze on my thigh. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. There were footsteps, then a shadow. A woman appeared in the doorway. At first, all I could make out was the silhouette, tall, slender, hair tied back beneath a white cap. The way she moved was strange, firm but fluid. Not Vietnamese. Not one of ours. Then I saw her face. Skin like porcelain, dotted with freckles. Eyes as blue as a river in the dry season. She didn't smile. She just looked at me with something close to curiosity. Or caution. Minh, she said quietly. I froze. She knew my name. No one here should have known my name. For days, I drifted in and out of sleep. Fever dreams came in waves, gunfire, smoke, mother's voice, Bao's blood on the leaves, thin as scream. But always, she was there. The woman. Sitting by my side. Writing something in a notebook. Changing my bandages with hands that were firm but gentle. She never spoke unless necessary. She treated me like I was human. Like I wasn't supposed to be her enemy. When I was well enough to sit up, they moved me to a corner cot in the infirmary. It was a makeshift building with tin walls and canvas sheets for doors. Outside, the jungle whispered with insects and distant gunfire. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet. Other soldiers lay on cots nearby, groaning, coughing, some missing limbs. Some never woke again. She came every morning. She changed my dressings, checked my temperature, scribbled in her chart. I listened to the rhythm of her breath, the way she counted in English, 1, 2, 3, as she moved her hands. I didn't understand much. But the tone in her voice was soft, careful. Like she knew I might shatter. On the 4th day, I tried to speak. "You American?" I whispered. She paused, looked me in the eyes, then gave a single nod. "Claire," she said, placing a hand on her chest. "Minh," I replied, doing the same. Her lips quirked into something like a smile. Not full, but enough. It was the first time I saw her not as a soldier, not as an enemy, but as someone, just someone. The other nurses didn't speak to me. Some of the soldiers sneered when they passed my cot. One muttered something under his breath that I didn't catch, but his tone was thick with hatred. I couldn't blame them. I was the VC boy shot on the wrong side of the jungle, bleeding in their care. I overheard one doctor arguing with Claire. "You don't even know who he is," he snapped. "He could be spying. Could have killed our boys." "He's a human being," she replied, voice sharp as steel. "A human being who'd slit your throat if he had the strength." She didn't respond. But that night, she stayed by my cot longer than usual. I pretended to sleep. But I saw her. Just sitting there, elbows on her knees, hands in her lap. Watching me like she was searching for something. Over the next weeks, I began to heal. The bullet had missed my lung but tore through the muscles of my ribcage. They said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt heavy. As if I'd left something vital behind in that ravine. Claire taught me small words in English: water, pain, thank you. I taught her CMN, AU, and M. She wrote them in a tiny notebook she carried in her pocket. Sometimes, she would bring me a tangerine or a bit of bread. I would try to give it back. She would shake her head and push it into my hand. One day, I pointed to the jade bracelet I still kept hidden beneath my pillow. She looked at it, then at me. "Mother," she asked, her hand mimicking the gesture for holding a child. I nodded. She smiled fully then for the first time. And I swear, the war disappeared for just a moment. We never spoke of politics. Never mentioned sides. It was as if we'd built a world inside that infirmary made only of small kindnesses, nods, glances. There was no room for ideology in the way she touched my arm, no room for hate in the way I looked at her when she laughed quietly at her own mispronunciations of Vietnamese. But outside, the world was burning. Each morning, helicopters roared overhead. Each night, the jungle lit up with fire and screams. New patients came in every hour, boys with holes in their chests, legs blown off, eyes wide with terror. And every day, I wondered, how long until they realized I didn't belong here? How long until someone dragged me out and finished what the bullet couldn't? But Claire kept me there. Somehow, she convinced them. Maybe it was her status. Maybe it was something else. I never asked. I only knew this: the longer I stayed, the more I feared leaving. Not because I feared the war, but because I feared never seeing her again. One rainy afternoon, while the sky screamed and the jungle hissed, she brought a book to my cot. It was a battered, yellowed novel in English of mice and men. She opened to the first page and began to read. I didn't understand the words, but her voice was something else. Gentle, steady, low. It filled the cracks in my chest like sunlight on cold earth. I watched her lips as she spoke. The way they curled, softened, shaped the sound. I didn't care about the story. I just wanted her to keep reading. When she closed the book, she looked up. I was still staring. She didn't blush. Claire didn't seem the type to blush. But she held my gaze for a long time. Then she reached out and touched my hand. Not a nurse's touch. Not a clinical gesture. A pause. A press. Like a memory waiting to be written. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the rain hit the tin roof, to the snores and coughs of the dying. And I thought about her hand in mine. About the way she said my name not as a label, but as a question. Like she was still trying to understand me. I thought about my mother. About how she would weep if she knew her son, her only son, was falling for a woman who wore the uniform of the enemy. But then I remembered her words. Don't lose your soul in the fire. And I wondered what if this was the only way to keep it? The next morning, I awoke to shouting. 2 soldiers were arguing outside the infirmary. I couldn't understand every word, but I caught enough. Why is he still here? He's not one of us. She's protecting him. Jesus, they're all going soft. Then footsteps. Heavy. Fast. The curtain flew open and a man in full uniform stepped in, eyes blazing. He looked at me like I was already guilty of something. What's your name? He barked. I didn't answer. He turned to Claire, who had entered behind him, her face pale but firm. He goes, he said. Now. You don't have the authority, Claire replied. I have orders. Claire's hands were clenched at her sides. Then you tell whoever gave you those orders that this man is my patient. He's not a soldier. He's a ghost. Claire looked at me, then back at him. Then let him haunt me. There was silence. He left. That night, Claire sat by my cot again. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she looked at me and said, "They'll move you soon. I can't stop it next time." I nodded. There was nothing to say. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. A handkerchief. White. Embroidered with blue thread. My name Minh stitched in uneven but careful lettering. She pressed it into my palm. I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I whispered. She looked at me, then leaned forward and kissed my forehead. Soft, like a leaf landing on water. She pulled away quickly, as if afraid she'd broken something. But I was already broken. And somehow, that kiss made the pieces hurt a little less. I left the next day. No goodbye. Just an order. A truck. A new uniform. They took me north. Back into the fire. But I carried two things with me. The jade bracelet from my mother. And a handkerchief with my name. Sewn by a nurse with no flag. After they pulled me out of the field hospital, I thought I would be reassigned to some supply unit, somewhere quiet. Somewhere the bullets whispered instead of screamed. But war doesn't care about your wishes. 2 weeks after I could walk again, they sent me back to my old unit. We weren't the same. Bao was gone. Thin barely spoke. The commander was new-hardened, suspicious, always scanning the horizon like it had cursed him personally. The trees felt closer now, the heat heavier. The jungle was no longer something to survive in, it was a beast you lived inside of. They called it Operation Smoke Rivera, 3-day reconnaissance mission deep into contested territory. Intelligence had reported signs of an American mobile medical outpost moving supplies through a ravine not far from the Laos border. Our job was simple: sneak in, scout, capture what we could, or kill who we must. The night we left, the air was thick with the promise of rain. We moved in single file, silent as shadows, the leaves brushing against our uniforms like whispered warnings. I carried my old rifle, the one I had nearly died with. My fingers had learned to hold it like a limb. We marched for hours. No light. No sound beyond the insects and the occasional grunt from a slipping boot. I thought of the field hospital, of the bandages, of her voice. Claire. I hadn't said her name out loud since I left. I told myself I'd never see her again. I believed that. Until the second day. We found them by accident. Hidden among the trees, half camouflaged under tarps and nets, was a temporary camp makeshift, likely mobile, an American. A few stretchers. A truck. 3 tents. No obvious guards. Medical unit, Thin whispered beside me, squinting. Doctors. Nurses. Maybe transport. Our commander's eyes glinted. Perfect, he said. Orders are clear. If we can take prisoners, do it. If not... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. We spread out, surrounded the camp from 3 angles. A flare signal was sent. And we moved in. The chaos lasted 3 minutes. Screams. Shots. Scattering. The Americans were caught off guard. 2 men tried to run. One was shot in the leg, the other surrendered. A woman bolted from one of the tents, holding her arms up. I was the first to reach her. She turned toward me, eyes wide with fear. And everything stopped. Claire. Her hair was a little longer. She had dirt on her cheeks, a rip on her sleeve. But it was her. The same blue eyes. The same face that had hovered over me as I lay bleeding, broken, half a ghost. She recognized me instantly. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Neither did I. Because around us, soldiers were shouting. One man screamed. Someone else kicked over a crate of medical supplies. I pointed my rifle at her not by choice, but by instinct. She stared at me, still and silent. Waiting. Minh. Thin called. You have that one? I nodded. He glanced at her. Tie her up. Quickly. Claire flinched. I stepped forward. Her hands were still raised. I whispered, in the softest Vietnamese I could manage, "Don't move." I pulled a cord from my pocket rough rope, made for prisoners. My hands trembled as I looped it loosely around her wrists. I didn't tie it tight. I didn't know what I was doing. We gathered the prisoners, 3 in total, 1 injured soldier, 1 unconscious driver, and Claire. Our commander barked orders, move fast, back to base by sunrise, burn the supplies. He didn't care who they were, just what message their capture would send. I couldn't breathe. The jungle felt smaller now, like it was closing around me. I walked behind Claire, pushing her forward gently. She never looked back. But I knew she knew. She could feel it. The silent war happening inside me. That night, we stopped to rest by a stream. Claire sat tied to a tree, head bowed, lips dry. No one else seemed to recognize her. She looked like just another enemy medic. I sat 10 meters away, polishing my rifle, pretending to ignore her. But my eyes never left her. When the others slept, I waited. Waited for the moon to rise. Waited for the moment no one was watching. Then I moved. Quietly. Carefully. I approached her and knelt in the mud. She looked up. Not afraid. Just waiting. I held a finger to my lips. Then pulled a knife from my belt. Her eyes widened. She tensed. I shook my head slowly and began to cut the rope. 1 strand at a time. Run, I whispered in English. She didn't move. Run, I said again. Still, she sat there. I could be shot for this, I hissed. She leaned forward and whispered, why? I didn't know. Maybe because I owed her my life. Maybe because I couldn't bear to see her dragged into a prisoner camp where no rules existed. Maybe because, in a world that had stripped everything from me, my name, my youth, my sleep, she had once called me human. That was enough. I placed the knife in her hand. Go, I said. She looked at me for what felt like a lifetime. Then she ran. No sound. No cry. Just the rustle of leaves as she disappeared into the jungle. I returned to my cot like nothing had happened. No one noticed. At dawn, when they counted the prisoners, they cursed and shouted. The commander blamed the guards. There was panic, fury, but no suspicion. I said nothing. Finn looked at me once, strangely. But he never asked. And I never explained. That day, we marched back. The 2 remaining prisoners were turned over to command. We received no praise. Just more orders. Just more war. But I had done something. Something that didn't come with a medal. Something that might one day get me killed. And yet, I felt clean. Not heroic. Not proud. Just human. For the first time in a long time. I never saw Claire again. At least not in that jungle. But I carried the memory of that moment, the look in her eyes when the rope fell, the way she hesitated, the way she ran as a secret I guarded more closely than my own dog tags. Because in a world built on orders, I had chosen mercy. And in that choice, something inside me had begun to change. There comes a moment in every soldier's life when you realize you've become something else. Not just a man with a rifle. Not even a name. But a wall. A wall between your homeland and the fire trying to consume it. And if that wall breaks, everything behind it burns. After the jungle mission the night I let Claire go, I was changed. But not in the way people expected. I didn't grow softer. I didn't question my place. If anything, I became sharper. The guilt of that night didn't weaken me. It focused me. I knew I could no longer afford hesitation. The war was growing hotter, and the enemy was no longer at the edges of the jungle. They were everywhere. Hidden. Clever. Merciless. So I became the same. I rose at dawn before the bugle call. I trained when others slept. I carried more rounds, more grenades, more weight than required. My rifle became an extension of my body. I sharpened my bayonet every night like a priest tending to his altar. I was no longer surviving. I was standing guard. For my homeland. For the fallen. For those whose names would never be remembered except in blood. They deployed us to Tay Nguyen, where the air was thinner and the trees never stopped dripping. Intelligence had reported a large-scale enemy build-up near a strategic crossroad village called Krong Na. Whoever controlled that road would control access to 3 provinces and our supply line. We were tasked with defending it. At any cost. The fighting started on the 3rd night. They came through the mist, wearing leaves, moving like shadows. No warning. Just gunfire exploding from the dark, tracer rounds ripping the sky, mortars lighting the trees on fire. The earth shook. The air tasted like smoke and cordite. We fought back with everything we had. We laid claymores in the mud. We dug foxholes with our hands. We screamed into the night with bayonets raised. I watched men I had trained with for years fall beside me. DNG, who always kept a photo of his little sister in his helmet shot in the chest. Tai, who sang lullabies in his sleep, hit by shrapnel in the neck. They didn't even get to scream. I took command of our flank when our sergeant went down. No one told me to. I just moved. "Hold the line!" I shouted, my voice hoarse, my arms coated in grime and blood, not all of it mine. "Don't let them pass." We fought for hours. I lost track of time. There was no difference between night and day anymore, just fire, screams, and silence. At dawn, they retreated. The field was quiet again, littered with twisted metal, smoking craters, and bodies. I could barely stand. My left arm had a deep gash, and my ankle throbbed from a fall. But I didn't leave the line. I stood there, rifle clenched, eyes fixed on the horizon. If they came again, I'd be ready. Even if it was just me. Reinforcements arrived the next morning. Too late for most. We buried our dead with numb hands and tearless eyes. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just carved their names into a flat rock with my bayonet and left it near the burnt-out tree where we had made our last stand. Thai. DNG. HNG. Lamb. For names carved into stone. For souls carved into mine. After Krong NA, I was recommended for a medal. I refused it. "I don't want metal," I told the officer. "I want ammunition." He laughed. But I meant it. The next months blurred together in a storm of marches, ambushes, and sleepless nights. We pushed deeper into territories we were never meant to hold. I lost count of how many firefights I survived. I only remembered the faces. Some wide-eyed and young. Some screaming and red. Some peaceful, almost relieved after the bullet found them. I didn't know what kept me alive. Skill? Luck? Stubbornness? Maybe all three. But I never let my rifle out of arm's reach. Not even when I slept. In early winter, our unit was assigned to secure a high ridge overlooking a crucial valley. It was called the Black Stone Ridge. From the top, you could see the whole valley floor, rivers, supply lines, and enemy movements. We were told to hold it at all costs. By then, those words didn't scare us. They just meant you might die today. We dug in, reinforced the hill with sandbags, planted mines, stretched barbed wire like webs between the rocks. And then we waited. The attack came 2 nights later. They hit us with everything. Artillery. Rockets. Infantry charges. The sky turned red. The ridge shook under our feet. At one point, they breached our left side. I grabbed a discarded machine gun and mowed down the advancing line until it jammed from heat. I picked up my rifle and kept firing. When I ran out of bullets, I used grenades. When the grenades were gone, I used my bayonet. When that snapped, I used my fists. I was bleeding from 3 different wounds, but I didn't stop. Because if I fell, they would take the ridge. And if they took the ridge, hundreds more would die below. I don't remember falling. Only the dirt in my mouth. And the feeling of rain on my face when I opened my eyes. The battlefield was silent again. The dead lay scattered like broken dolls. But the ridge was still ours. We had held it. Barely. They pulled me from the front line after that. Said I needed rest. said I had done enough. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt hollow, like the war had eaten something inside me and left the shape behind. But I would do it again, if it meant one more village stayed safe. One more mother didn't have to bury her son. One more boy could grow up learning to plant rice instead of mines. At the infirmary, they stitched me back together. I didn't speak. Not because I couldn't, but because words felt too small for what I had seen. The doctor said I might not return to the front for weeks. I nodded. But I already knew. As soon as I could walk, I would go back. Because my country was still burning. And as long as I could hold a weapon, I would not let it burn alone. War doesn't give you time to think, let alone to love. But sometimes, for a breath, even war forgets itself. And in that breath, two people can find each other again. The battle for Hill 47 lasted 3 days. We lost 30 men. The Americans lost more. The ground was soaked in blood and oil, and the jungle around us looked like it had been chewed by fire. I had taken shrapnel to my side, not deep, but enough to slow me down. I refused evacuation, but my commanding officer overruled me. "You'll be dead by next week if that festers," he said. "They've set up a field hospital down the valley. You'll be back in a few days." I didn't argue. I didn't care. I just wanted silence. I just wanted to stop shaking. They brought me down the mountain on a stretcher tied to bamboo poles. Every bump sent pain lancing through my ribs, but I bit down and said nothing. We reached the field hospital by dusk. White canvas tents stood like ghosts between the trees, their flaps flapping gently in the humid wind. The air reeked of blood, alcohol, and despair. There were Americans there, and Vietnamese. And no one asked which side you bled for as long as you bled. They dumped me on a cot and left. A nurse came over. I didn't look at her until she spoke. "Minh?" The world stopped. I turned my head slowly, afraid I had finally gone mad. But she was real. Claire. Her face was older, tired. But her eyes, those same clear, blue eyes, held me like they did the first time she touched my hand in a hospital months ago. Neither of us moved for a long time. She was holding a clipboard, but her hands trembled. The paper slipped to the floor. She started, but the words tangled in her throat. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. She knelt beside me and brushed the mud from my cheek. Her fingers were shaking. "Still alive," she whispered. "After all this time." And I smiled. Because so was she. They gave me a corner cot under the plastic tarp. It was hot. It smelled of rot. But I didn't care. Because Claire was there. And for 3 days, she became my whole world again. We couldn't talk openly, there were too many eyes. Too many questions. But we found ways. When she checked my bandages, she let her fingers linger longer than needed. When she handed me water, she pressed her palm to mine. When no one was watching, she left half of a biscuit wrapped in cloth at the edge of my cot with a single word scribbled on a torn label. Tonight. That night, I limped past the outer tent line under the cover of darkness. The jungle murmured softly. Far off, gunfire echoed like distant thunder. She was waiting behind the supply tent, near the tree line. She wore her white coat. I wore bandages and fatigue. We didn't speak at first. We just stood there, breathing the same air. Then she stepped forward and took my hand. It was the first time we had touched without fear. I looked at her, really looked. Her cheek was bruised. Her eyes had dark circles. Her hands were thinner. She had been through hell. So had I. But here we were. Alive. Still human. Still us. I thought I'd never see you again, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought you were dead, I replied. I was, she said. Parts of me. We stood like that for a long time. Then she leaned forward, rested her forehead against mine. The world disappeared. No gunfire. No flags. No orders. Just us. We met like that again the next night. And the next. Each time, we spoke more quietly, carefully, like children sneaking secrets in a world that wanted nothing more than to break us. She told me she had transferred from a unit near Da Nang. Volunteered for the front line. I wanted to help, she said. But maybe I also wanted to find something I lost. I knew what she meant. I told her about Hill 47. About the names I carved into a tree. About how sometimes I couldn't remember my own name, only the screams. She held my hand tighter. We're not meant to live like this, she said. Any of us. But we are, I replied. And I'm still fighting. For them. For the land. For something worth saving. She didn't argue. But her eyes filled with tears. On the fourth night, she brought me a letter. It was folded inside a blood pressure logbook. I wrote this, she said, in case something happens. I opened it after she left. It said, Minh, I don't know how many days we have left. I don't know if we'll ever have peace. But I know this, when I see you, I feel something that has nothing to do with war. When I touch your hand, I remember who I am. If we survive this, I want to find you. In peace. Not as a nurse. Not as a soldier. Just as me. Claire. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside my jacket, next to my mother's jade bracelet. But war doesn't care about letters. Or hands. Or love. The next day, the hospital was bombed. An airstrike. Wrong coordinates. Half the tents went up in flames. Screams filled the trees. Blood soaked the ground. I stumbled out of my cot, grabbing at my ribs. The sky was black with smoke. I saw her, Claire, dragging a wounded man out of a burning tent. I ran to her, ducking falling debris. We pulled him to safety. Another blast hit nearby. I threw myself over her. When the dust cleared, we were both coughing, burned, but alive. They evacuated the hospital after that. We were loaded onto different trucks, no time for goodbyes. She squeezed my hand once before they pulled her away. "Don't forget," she said. "I won't." Then she was gone. But before she left, she gave me one last thing. A torn piece of cloth from her sleeve. She had stitched something onto it. "Keep going." I kept it. Through the next campaign. Through another winter. Through the end of the war. Through everything. Because sometimes, in the darkest moments, you don't need hope. You just need a reason. And she was mine. There is a silence that follows war, not the silence of peace, but of breath held in waiting. As if the land itself is bracing for one final scream. In early spring, the orders came. General offensive. The final push. The battle that would end the war, end us. We had heard the rumors for weeks. That the enemy was retreating. That their lines were thin. That Saigon was within reach. But we also knew what desperation looked like. Cornered enemies are the most dangerous. So we didn't prepare for a parade. We prepared for fire. My unit was deployed north of Buon Ma Thuot, where the hills rolled like broken waves and the trees never stopped whispering. Intelligence reported the enemy's last stronghold was positioned atop Misty Hill, a naturally fortified ridge with artillery posts and entrenched bunkers. They had dug in. They were ready to die there. We were told to take it. At any cost. The night before we marched, we sat around the low flames of our campfires. There was no singing. No stories. Just the sound of sharpening knives and quiet breathing. I checked my rifle 3 times. I didn't speak. Neither did Thin, who sat beside me, wiping down his machine gun with hands that no longer trembled. "Do you think we'll make it?" he asked finally, his voice almost a whisper. I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. We began the assault at dawn. Artillery opened first, painting the sky in smoke and fire. Then mortars followed, thumping from the ridge like a warning heartbeat. Then came the call. "Advance!" We ran through the fog, mud clinging to our boots, bullets snapping past like vipers. The hill erupted, machine guns chattered from the bunkers, tearing through trees and men. Mortars fell like thunder from the ridge. I saw a comrade go down, clutching his stomach. Another screamed and never stopped. I kept running. Not because I was brave. Because there was no other choice. We reached the first trench line under a hail of bullets. It was chaos, shouts in different tongues, grenades thudding, bayonets flashing. I lunged forward, slammed into a soldier's chest, drove my rifle's blade in deep. I didn't feel it. I didn't think. I just moved. We fought like animals. Because the hill didn't want to let us in. But we clawed our way up. By mid-morning, we had taken the lower trenches. But the summit was still theirs. I could barely hear myself over the noise. Dirt rained from the sky with every blast. Blood soaked my sleeves, some mine, some not. An order came down. Flank from the east. Take the upper bunkers. I grabbed Thin and 2 others. We crawled through thickets and broken stone, staying low, moving inch by inch toward the high ground. Suddenly a flash. An explosion. Pain shot through my leg as something tore across it. I fell hard behind a rock. Thin pulled me up. "You're bleeding." "I'm fine," I lied. We kept moving. We couldn't stop. We reached the upper trench by late afternoon. Only a few defenders remained tired, wounded, desperate. We overwhelmed them. When I looked back, the slope below us was a scar of smoke, torn earth, and broken bodies. But the hill was ours. We planted our flag at dusk, red against grey sky. Some of the men wept. Some fell to their knees. I didn't. I stood there, barely breathing, covered in mud and blood, and looked out across the valley. And for the first time in years, I saw light. In the days that followed, everything moved fast. The enemy pulled back. Our forces advanced. One by one, cities fell. And finally on April 30th, 1975, the war ended. We didn't cheer when the radio broadcast the news. We didn't hug. We just looked at one another and exhaled. That night, I sat alone under the stars, holding my rifle across my knees like I always had. But I didn't feel like a soldier anymore. Not because the war had ended, but because I had survived it. And now, I didn't know who I was without it. But even as the gunfire ceased, one sound echoed louder than ever in my heart. A voice. Soft. Familiar. Saying my name. Minh. Claire. I had survived the war. Now I had to keep my promise. Find her. In peace. As me. The war ended, but my battle didn't. The guns fell silent, the flags changed, and soldiers turned into citizens overnight. But inside me, the sounds of war lingered like echoes in a cave too deep to fill. The world moved on. I didn't know how. I stayed in the south after the final victory. I thought I might find her there, Claire. I didn't know if she was alive, if she had left with the other foreign medics, or if she had been buried in one of the mass graves scattered across the country. But I needed to know. I searched hospitals, aid camps, field records. I asked doctors, nurses, anyone who had worked with international organizations. She was American, I would say. Tall. Fair skin. Blue eyes. Her name was Claire. No one remembered her. Or maybe they had simply seen too many faces, too many wounded, too many dead. I visited the Foreign Affairs Office. I wrote a letter addressed to her organization, requesting information. I signed it Minh, no rank, no surname, just Minh. I never received a reply. Weeks passed. I began to walk through the streets of Saigon like a ghost, waiting for something to appear. A sign. A message. A miracle. It never came. One evening, I sat on the rooftop of an abandoned building overlooking the city. The sky was bruised orange, and the scent of smoke still hung in the air. I took out a notebook I had kept hidden in my rucksack, and I wrote her a letter. Claire, I don't know where this letter will go. I don't know where you are. But I hope you're alive. I hope you remember me. I've seen too much blood, too much death, but your face, it stayed with me. I want to believe we met for a reason. That what we shared mattered, even in a world full of chaos. If you're out there reading this, know that I made it. And that I haven't forgotten. Minh. I folded the letter, placed it inside an empty ammunition pouch, and sealed it shut. I never mailed it. Some things are written only to be kept. Eventually, I returned to my village. The rice fields were burned. The river was low. The people were tired. So was I. But the war had taught me something. If you can stand, you can build. If you can carry a rifle, you can carry wood. If you can march, you can work. I worked. At first, it was simple, carrying sacks of grain, fixing broken doors, hauling bricks. I didn't ask for money. Just food. A dry place to sleep. People began to recognize me. Not as a hero, just as someone who didn't quit. That was enough. Years passed. I saved every penny I earned. I bought an old toolbox. I started repairing bicycles, then radios, and later sewing machines. By 1980, I had a small repair stall near the marketplace. I called it Minh Fixes Everything. People laughed at the name, but they brought their broken things anyway. Sometimes I still dreamed of Claire. She would walk into the shop, smile, and say, "You fixed this." I always woke up before I could answer. In 1986, the country changed. Reforms swept through the system. Suddenly, we were allowed to trade, to sell, to start again. I did. I bought used bicycles from the south and sold them in the north. I carried radios on my back across provinces. I bartered, bargained, traveled by foot, truck, ox cart. I failed often, but I never stopped. By the early 1990s, I had opened my first real shop. By the end of the decade, I had 3. People called me a businessman. It still sounded strange. I still walked like a soldier. One day, a young employee asked me, "Uncle Minh, why aren't you married?" I smiled. "Because some things don't return," I said. They didn't ask again. Sometimes I thought of looking for Claire again. There were more ways now: embassies, internet cafes, people who knew people. But something inside me hesitated. Maybe I was afraid of what I might find. Maybe I was afraid of not finding anything at all. So I kept her letter. And the cloth she once gave messaged with the words, "Keep going." I kept going. I didn't become rich. But I became steady. Respected. Trusted. I hired other veterans. I mentored kids who had nothing but 2 hands and stubborn hearts. I taught them what war had taught me, that survival isn't enough. that a man must build. Not just for himself, but for something beyond him. Every now and then, when the shop was closed and the street was quiet, I would sit alone and unfold the letter I never sent. It was yellow now, soft at the creases, but her name was still clear at the top. Claire. I never stopped missing her, but I also never let that longing destroy me. I carried her like I carried my past, close, quiet, and without regret. I was no longer the man she had known. But everything I became started the moment she said my name in a tent full of dying men. I never thought the past would find me again. After all these years, decades, even I had built a life far away from the gunfire and ghosts that once haunted every corner of my mind. I was a businessman now, not a soldier. A man who balanced accounts instead of battle plans. Yet, one letter changed everything. It came quietly, hidden inside a package from a European friend. The envelope was old-fashioned, the handwriting delicate but unmistakable. Claire. The name struck me like a sudden storm. I sat alone in my office, the city's noise muted by the walls, and stared at the letter like it was a miracle. My hands trembled as I unfolded the fragile paper. Dear Minh, if you are reading this, then fate has found a way to bring us back together. I have searched for you across continents and decades, holding on to the memories of a man who saved me when the world was falling apart. I am alive. And I hope you are too. If you want to see me again, I will be waiting at the Café de l'Espoir in Paris every Sunday afternoon this spring. Please come. Claire. For a long time, I could only breathe. I couldn't speak. I couldn't believe. Was she truly alive? Had she really waited all these years? The past, once buried under layers of survival and silence, suddenly rose up like a tidal wave, threatening to sweep me away. That night, I sat by my window, the letter on my lap, the city lights flickering like distant stars. I thought of all the things I wanted to say to her, all the questions I wanted to ask. But mostly, I thought about the moments we shared in that war-torn jungle, the fleeting touch of her hand, the quiet courage in her eyes, the promise we never spoke aloud. The days after receiving Claire's letter were a restless blur. I tried to bury the emotions under work, but every tick of the clock reminded me of the invitation, a chance to see her again. I pulled out my old passport, worn and marked with stamps from years of travel. The thought of crossing continents, stepping into a city I had only seen in photos, made my heart pound. Could I really do this? Could I find her after all this time? Claire's words echoed in my mind, if you want to see me again. Each night, I rehearsed what I would say, what I would ask. Would she remember me as clearly as I remembered her? Would the years have changed us too much? I contacted old friends overseas, those I trusted, and asked for help. Arranging visas, planning the trip, each step felt like navigating a new battlefield. The uncertainty was as daunting as any fight I'd faced. And yet, something inside me stirred a quiet hope I hadn't felt in years. Weeks later, I stepped off the plane in Paris. The air was cool and filled with the scent of spring blossoms. The city buzzed with life, a stark contrast to the jungles and ruins of my past. Every street, every cafe seemed alive with stories. Yet my story, our story, felt fragile and uncertain. Sunday came. I found myself standing outside Café de l'Espoir, the very place Claire had named. The faded sign swung gently in the breeze, the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifting through the open door. And then I saw her. Claire. Sitting alone by the window, her silver hair catching the afternoon light. Her eyes scanned the street until they met mine. Time stopped. As our eyes locked, a flood of memories rushed through me: the endless nights in the jungle, the desperate hope in her gaze, the brief moments of tenderness amid chaos. She smiled softly, the same gentle smile I had etched into my memory all these years. I approached slowly, as if afraid the moment might shatter. "Claire," I whispered. She nodded, tears glistening. We sat together, words faltering at first, replaced by silence filled with everything we had left unsaid. Then, as the afternoon waned, stories began to flow of survival, loss, resilience. She told me of her life after the war, the loneliness of returning home, the quiet battles she fought within. I spoke of my journey of rebuilding, of hope, and the weight of memories that never faded. The cafe buzzed quietly around us, but we were in a world of our own. We vowed to face the future together, carrying the past not as a burden, but as the foundation of a new beginning. Days turned into weeks, and Claire and I grew closer, rediscovering one another beyond the shadows of war. Every conversation was a delicate weaving of past and present, a tapestry of shared pain and newfound hope. We walked Parisian streets hand in hand, feeling the warmth of spring after a lifetime of cold silence. I marveled at her resilience, the quiet strength that had carried her through decades of uncertainty. But healing was not without struggle. Nightmares haunted our sleep, and sometimes the past pressed so hard it felt suffocating. Yet, in those moments, we found comfort in each other's presence, knowing we were no longer alone. Together, we began to imagine a future not defined by loss, but by love and the promise of renewal. Slowly, the layers of distance and time began to peel away. We shared old photographs, letters, and stories that had been locked away in the corners of our hearts. Every revelation was a step toward rebuilding trust, toward reclaiming the lives war had tried to steal. I learned of Claire's life in America after Vietnam, her efforts to help other veterans, her quiet struggles with memories she could never fully escape. She listened as I recounted the years spent shaping a new life in a country torn apart but full of hope. Our days became filled with small routines, cooking meals together, exploring new parts of the city, even attempting to learn each other's languages more deeply. But beneath the surface, the question lingered: how do two people, separated by war and decades, build a life together? We faced challenges neither of us had fully anticipated. Differences in culture, the weight of old wounds, and the pressures of reinvention tested our bond. Yet, each obstacle only deepened our commitment. One evening, as twilight bathed the city in soft hues, Claire turned to me and said, "We have survived so much to be here. We owe it to ourselves to try." Her words echoed my own unspoken hopes. Together, we sought therapy and joined support group spaces where our pasts were understood, where healing was possible. Gradually, our love grew not only from memory but from the daily choice to move forward. As months passed, we built a fragile normalcy, learning how to be partners in a world so different from the one that had forged our bond. We discovered joys in everyday moments, shared breakfasts, walks along the Seine, quiet evenings with music and wine. but the shadows of the past occasionally crept in. Sometimes a song, a scent, or a sudden silence would pull us back into memories better left untouched. Yet, we faced these moments hand in hand, growing stronger. I realized that the war had taken much, but it had also given me Clary, a beacon in the dark. And now, I was determined to make every moment count. One crisp spring morning, as sunlight streamed through the curtains, Claire and I sat quietly over coffee. There was a peacefulness I had not known for decades, a calm born of healing, forgiveness, and the promise of a future shared. I looked at her, the woman who had once been a stranger in a war zone, now my closest companion. "We have come so far," she said softly. I nodded. "And we still have a long road ahead." But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. Together, we would face whatever came next with courage, love, and a resolve stronger than any war. After years of waiting and wondering, Claire and I found ourselves beginning a new, not in the chaos of war, but in the quiet hum of everyday life. Paris was foreign and beautiful. Every morning, the city awoke with soft light and the scent of fresh bread. Yet beneath the charm, we both carried scars deeper than the cobblestone streets. We had lived separate lives, shaped by different worlds, and now we were tasked with building one together. The first days were filled with small gestures, shared breakfasts, silent walks through gardens, and the comfort of just being near each other. But soon, the reality of what we had lost, and what we hoped to regain, settled in. The mornings grew brighter, but healing took time more than either of us expected. I watched Claire struggle with moments of silence that carried the weight of memories too heavy to speak aloud. Sometimes, she would gaze out the window for minutes on end, lost in a world I could not reach. I understood those moments. I had my own shadows, images of battlefields, fallen friends, and the boy who never returned from the riverbank. The memories came uninvited, stealing peace in the dead of night. We tried to speak about the past, but the words often fell short. How do you explain the silence after the storm? How do you share pain that never fully heals? Slowly, we found comfort in small rituals, sharing a cup of coffee at dawn, reading books aloud, exploring the quiet streets hand in hand. These moments stitched the frayed edges of our lives back together. I taught Claire how to cook Vietnamese dishes, and she showed me the art of French pastries. We laughed at our mistakes, celebrated small victories, and learned to live again. Yet, beneath the smiles, a fragile tension lingered. The years apart had built walls that took more than love to tear down. As the weeks unfolded, we faced challenges neither of us had fully anticipated. The world outside was unfamiliar, new laws, new customs, and a language that still tangled on my tongue. Claire, too, had her own adjustments to make, caught between the woman she once was and the one she wanted to become. Business matters pulled at my attention. I worked long hours, navigating the complex networks of trade and finance, determined to build a stable future. Claire supported me, often translating documents and mediating cultural gaps that I struggled to bridge. But no amount of work could erase the ghosts of the past. There were nights when the silence between us grew heavy, filled with unspoken fears and regrets. We were two souls trying to reconcile decades of pain with the hope of tomorrow. One evening, after a particularly long day, Claire found me staring at an old photograph, the only one we had kept from the war. It was of us, younger, in the makeshift hospital, eyes tired but alive. She sat beside me and whispered, "We have come so far, Minh. We can keep going." Her words became a mantra, a light guiding us through the darkness. The healing process was neither linear nor easy. Sometimes, a simple disagreement would ignite old wounds, memories that neither of us were ready to face. Other times, the sheer joy of being together again would remind us why the struggle was worth it. We began attending counseling sessions, seeking guidance from professionals who understood the silent battles veterans and survivors carried. Sharing our stories with others who had endured similar pain helped break down the walls of isolation. Claire reconnected with communities of former aid workers and nurses, while I found solace among fellow veterans living far from home. These networks became lifelines, weaving our personal journeys into a larger tapestry of healing. Despite the challenges, our love matured, no longer the desperate hope of youth but a steady flame forged in resilience. One of the hardest lessons we learned was patience with each other and ourselves. There were days when the weight of the past threatened to pull us under, and days when simple acts of kindness felt like victories. We took small trips beyond Paris, exploring the French countryside, visiting places where time seemed to slow, and nature offered quiet refuge. In those moments, the world felt less heavy, and we could breathe again. We began dreaming of a home filled with light and laughter, of a family that might never have been possible without our survival, and of a future where the war was only a chapter, not the whole story. With each passing day, the fabric of our new life grew stronger. We celebrated anniversaries quietly, small dinners, shared memories, and promises whispered in the dark. "Minh, I remember the way you held my hand when the nightmares came," Claire said one evening, her voice soft but steady. "And I remember your strength when I felt lost," I replied. Our past had shaped us, but it would not define us. Together, we were writing a new story, one of hope, resilience, and love that transcended time and distance. As the seasons changed, Minh and Claire's lives settled into a gentle rhythm. The initial turbulence of reunion gave way to the slow, steady work of building a shared future. They found comfort in routines, morning walks along the Seine, evenings filled with cooking and music, and weekends spent exploring the quiet corners of Paris. Yet, beneath the calm surface, the scars of their past never fully faded. There were moments when memories of war surged unexpectedly, a sudden noise, a certain smell, stirring feelings both painful and familiar. But these moments, though difficult, also reminded them of the strength they had found in each other. They faced the past together, and in doing so, crafted a bond that was unbreakable. In time, Minh and Claire began to look beyond their past hardships toward the future they could create. They dreamed of a home filled with warmth, friends, and laughter, a sanctuary where love could thrive free from the shadows of war. Minh expanded his business, using the lessons from his past to build not just a company but a community. Claire found purpose in helping others heal, volunteering at organizations supporting veterans and survivors. Together, they embraced the challenges ahead with courage and compassion, knowing that their journey, though marked by pain, had also been blessed by an enduring love. I never imagined that, after all the years of war and loss, I would find myself here sitting quietly in a cafe in Paris, watching the world move on around me. Claire was beside me, her hand warm in mine, her presence a steady anchor in a sea of change. The city was alive, vibrant, and beautiful, but inside me, I felt a quiet storm. The memories of the past never truly left, lurking beneath the surface like shadows at dusk. Yet, for the first time in decades, I felt hope. We had rebuilt something fragile and precious, a life born from the ashes of pain. Every morning, I woke with a determination to face whatever came next, to build, to grow, and to live fully. Some days, the past felt closer than the present. A sudden noise, a phrase, or a scent could bring back the chaos of the battlefield in vivid detail. I could almost hear the gunfire, smell the smoke, feel the weight of the rifle in my hands. But then I'd look at Claire, see the softness in her eyes, and remember that I was no longer alone in that fight. The city around us was full of promise and change. Paris moved fast, but we moved at our own pace, learning, healing, sometimes stumbling, but always together. Claire found new purpose in her work with veterans, helping others who carried invisible scars like our own. I poured myself into my business, but never lost sight of the man I was beneath the suits and contracts. We dreamed quietly of a future not defined by the war, but by the love and resilience that had carried us through. Some nights, sleep eluded me. The silence of the apartment felt heavy, filled with memories too loud to ignore. I would lie awake, tracing the lines on Claire's face, thankful she was there, yet haunted by the shadows that sometimes crept between us. She understood without words our shared history was a bond no one else could know. Together, we faced the remnants of the past, acknowledging the pain but refusing to be defined by it. Slowly, our conversations grew deeper. We spoke of forgiveness of others, of ourselves, of the future we hoped to build. The war had taken much from us, but it had also given us a rare gift, the chance to love again, to heal, and to hope. Life, as always, had its ups and downs. Some days, success in business filled me with pride. Other days, the weight of memories pressed heavily on my chest. Claire and I found strength in each other. We celebrated small victories, a good deal closed, a new friendship formed, a shared laugh after a long day. We attended gatherings with friends and family, weaving ourselves into the fabric of a community that had once felt so foreign. Through it all, I held tightly to the promise I made in the darkest days to keep moving forward, to build a life worthy of those who did not return. We learned that rebuilding was not just about constructing a business or finding peace, it was about rebuilding trust, opening hearts, and embracing vulnerability. Claire's presence reminded me daily that love required patience and understanding. She taught me to listen, to share, and to forgive not just others, but myself. Together, we planted seeds of hope. We volunteered, we supported others, and slowly, our wounds began to heal. The future was uncertain, but no longer frightening. With Claire by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. As time passed, we found joy in the little things: morning coffees, quiet walks, shared dreams. The city that once felt vast and unfamiliar slowly became home. I saw in Claire a reflection of my own resilience. Together, we built a life that honored our past but wasn't imprisoned by it. The war remained a chapter in our story, but not the whole book. We had a future, one written in hope, healing, and the strength of love that had endured decades. There were days when I still felt the weight of loneliness, moments when the silence was too loud, and memories rushed back like a flood. But Claire was always there, her hand reaching for mine, steady and sure. We learned to be patient with ourselves and with each other. We found comfort in shared rituals, evening walks along the Seine, cooking meals together, reading aloud in 2 languages. Our love was no longer a desperate grasp but a calm harbor. We had survived the storm, and now we sailed toward the horizon, uncertain, but together. On a quiet spring evening, as the sun dipped low over the city, Claire and I sat on our small balcony, the lights of Paris twinkling below us. We talked about the future dreams of travel, family, and a life built on the fragile peace we had found. I realized then that the war, though it had shaped us, no longer controlled us. With Claire by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next. Our journey was far from over, but together, we had found a new horizon.